Okay, in this video we're going to be planning the article that we just got through reading with the prompt that we just got through reading. So we've already have our TTAP set up here. We know it's an informational text. We know we're explaining the relationship between clothing style and creation. We could be writing to a historian, someone who's a fashion expert, and we've already kind of found our evidence in our read. So the first thing I want to handle is my prompt answer, because that's going to point where my essay goes. It's really the beginning of the thesis. It's the beginning of where I want to go with my thesis. And so, as I told you in the last video, to me, there seems to be a relationship as far as what the technology can do to the style. So, as the technology changes, so does the style. So, in my prompt answer, I'm going to kind of indicate that. All right? So, I'm going to say, as the technology for clothing creation changes, right outside the box here, that's okay, comma, because I got a transition in, so does clothing styles. And I know I know that each of these articles that we read uses kind of history in a certain way. So I think I want to talk about, I may just kind of ... throughout history as an idea. Probably should have put it at the beginning of my sentence, but that's okay. So if the technology for clothing creation changes, so does clothing styles throughout history. And I know that those articles kind of deal with different time periods. I remember talking about that before. We know that source 3, and you can look at this to make sure I'm right, we know that source 3 is the most modern, right? And so if I want to move chronologically, I think I want to put my most modern one last. And so I might say something like modern day for my third body paragraph. Modern day, because remember, these K's are my key ideas. And so I think my key idea for key idea 3 is going to deal with like how the modern day is impacted by this technology changing. And I know that prompt 1 started talking about like Civil War and then like factories being made for soldiers and all that kind of stuff. And so I know that I'm talking about sort of the Industrial Revolution kind of as a time period. So that definitely was a big change in style. So I'm going to put industrial. All right. So kind of the industrial days. And I even put like rev days right there to kind of remind me it's revolution. And then I know that second source, it talked about like really old stuff. So like royal families and different like island societies and during the Renaissance, all that sort of stuff. So, I don't know all those historical eras beautifully, but I'll just call it pre-industrial, because I know that with the industrial I had a lot of factories and stuff. So this was kind of the rise of the factories. This was before factories, and this is like rise of modern information technology. So I have 3 different focus points. Now you may notice here that this prompt answer and these 3 don't really make a clear sentence. And you're probably going to find that a lot in your informational kind of expository prompts. This whole sentence thing really works well with argumentative prompts. But with informational prompts, you may have to divide your paper a little differently than having kind of like 3 reasons why, for example. There may not be a really easy 3 reasons why model for your essay. So just kind of use this as a way of thinking about it. This is sort of the beginning of your thesis. So like this is the core of the thesis. And this right here is just kind of ways of dividing that, organizing that, and thinking about that whenever I start to write. So I got pre-industrial, industrial revolution, and modern day. So now I need to look for sources. So I know that pre-industrial one, this right here, is source 2. So I'm going to go to source 2, and I'm going to look at source 2 pretty closely here. And I think I'm going to start with, like, I think if I look at this source right here, this highlight where it says families made their own clothing by hand from fabric they made or purchased locally. So I think I'm dealing with source 2, paragraph 4. So I'm just going to let myself know, because again, on this plan, I really don't need to write all these quotes out. That may waste time. But I know that source 2 which is going to be paragraph 4 overall, right? Paragraph 4 overall. It seems like all the paragraphs are just numbered all the way through. So paragraph 4 from source 2, maybe just families made so that I can see where my highlight starts. But I think with that one I can prove to my reader here that families had to make their clothes by hand, and as a result there's only so many things they could do with their clothing style. So that takes me to the second part of this source where it says, so I'm looking at this evidence right here, where it says almost every culture had some version of a tied rope or tunic, essentially a loose fabric that draped and was secured by a belt. And then later it says most clothes at this time will be considered very oversized by modern standards. And if this was true about all cultures, I think I can go, so source 2, so like late paragraph 4, and you can code this however makes sense to you. I'm just kind of calling it late paragraph 4 because I know kind of what I mean by that because I made the mark. And so I would probably start with like almost every culture, and I'd probably go to, I'd cut some stuff, but I would consider like oversized by modern standards. I think I would use that. Because basically what I'm saying is you had to hand make your stuff, and so that made it very difficult to kind of keep clothes to a bunch of different styles or anything like that, because you had one pattern that you sort of made, and then almost every culture had a version of a tied rope or tunic, and they would be very loose. So basically you basically just created a piece of fabric that you would drape around yourself. So the styles couldn't be that varied. You just really had color and a big bunch of fabric. So not a whole lot of technology, which means not a whole lot of variation in style. That's the way I'm reading it. So I've got those two quotes that I can use, and these are all source 2 quotes. Now I want to go to source 1, because I know that that's where the Industrial Revolution stuff comes in. So I remember that in that first paragraph I found some quotes that really, I thought, made this kind of interesting. Mass-producing uniforms necessitated the development of standard sizes. I kind of thought that was important. Mass-producing means like they can produce a ton at a time. So I know that I'm dealing with source 1. I know that I'm dealing with paragraph 1. And I'm just going to kind of tell myself mass-producing, just to let myself know that that's the one that I'm looking for. That highlight starts with mass-producing. Because I can analyze here and basically say that whenever you can make things more quickly, or in order to make things more quickly, if you want to make them in bulk, you got to have like certain pre-programmed sizes and plans, so that you're not trying to make a different article for everybody. That super slows down your process. I think I can explain that based upon what we're talking about here. And for evidence 2, I'm also pulling from source 1. And I really want to think about styles here, because I want to show how the production method impacts the style. And I think I'm going to have to go later in the article for that. Let's go later in the article for that. It looks like I'm dealing with this one. So they were up-to-date fashion items that could be easily replaced as styles changed. Making clothes more quickly meant styles did change more frequently as well. I really want that sentence because it talks about production and style. So I'm dealing with paragraph 2 and making clothes. I'm just going to put that making clothes line to let me know, hey, that's where my quote begins, and I can put that quote in my E2 for that Industrial Revolution paragraph. Because that, again, that tells me as my technology changes, so does the kind of clothes that I can make. That also changes. So that gets my evidence for that, and now I'm just kind of, all I have left is source 3. All I have left is source 3. And so they mentioned a couple different things. I think on source 3, we can deal with this piece of evidence where it says, today designers often have computer-aided design software at their disposal to determine textile weaves and sizing designs. So I'm just going to say source 3, and I'm going to say paragraph 7, piece 7, and then I'm just going to put CAD because I know that's what my quote's about. So that's CAD, CAD, design, determine textile weaves and stuff. So if you can use a computer program to design your clothes, you have a lot more options than you used to have. And the other example they were talking about was the 3D printing, and I think for source 3 here we're dealing with paragraph 8. And it says, or maybe 2 quotes I have to pull for this one, but it says, designers have been experimenting, where are you? There you are. There. Designers have been experimenting with 3D printed apparel, and this could revolutionize the experience of buying clothes for the average consumer. So I'm just going to go paragraph 8. And I'm going to start with designers. And then I also like this one right here on the back where it says, one day we may all be wearing our own one-of-a-kind, perfectly tailored clothes. And then I may just go like last sentence, one day. Because I think I can use that to make the claim, or not the claim, but make the point that as technology gets even more advanced, I'll really be able to do some unique things, and we're kind of going back from in the pre-industrial days where you had to be wealthy and clothes were made specifically for you if you were wealthy. Otherwise, you just wore fabric around yourself. The Industrial Revolution created clothing of a certain size, and you kind of had to find your size, but they were mass-produced. Now, for the modern day, it may be going back to what it used to be, so that you could print and design individual clothing based upon your own needs. So I can see this kind of trend over time of change from technology. But either way, technology seems to be the root of it. What can I do with technology? That's going to determine a lot of ways what I can do with clothing styles. So that's how I would make that. Now this last box, and we always get confused about this last box, and a lot of times on this actual planning, you don't really have to fill out this last box because the core of your thesis is already decided. You know that as technology for clothing creation changes, so does clothing styles. This is basically your thesis. Okay. Now throughout history is what we're adding here. So the pre-industrial, industrial, and the modern day. That's the idea that we're adding. So you might tweak the language of that to create your thesis, where you put all these together. So you might say, as technology for clothing creation changes, from the pre-industrial to the modern day, clothing styles have also changed, something like that. So that incorporates some of what I'm dividing here in my plan, and keeping my main idea down. So that's how you could plan an essay like this on a prompt like this with evidence like we found whenever we read. So this is the third of the 3-step process, and honestly this shouldn't take you any more than about 20 to 30 minutes whenever you're taking your real test. So after about a half hour, if you haven't started writing the real paper yet, you need to get started, because really you should have the plan and the reading and the T-tapping all done within that first half hour. Okay, let me know if you have any questions, but hopefully this is helpful, and that is all.